Hey all of you, here we are at the conclusion of the 2022 Energy Efficiency Summit. We've just had an incredible afternoon of discussion. We've had keynotes from California and reflections on Europe, and we've had the Assistant Minister, Jenny McAllister, announce an exciting new process to put together a new energy efficiency strategy for Australia. Then we've gone deep dives into residential and commercial and industrial, and we've all been reflecting on how crucial it is that we grasp this opportunity and for once and for all put energy efficiency at the heart of this clean energy transition that we've all been working through. There's been so much. My head is kind of exploding, and I need to kind of integrate all of this information. So I've bailed up all of you good people to help me do that. And I should introduce you, Heidi, CEO of Beyond Zero Emissions, Andrew McAllister, California Energy Commission, direct from Davis and with us here for the week here in Australia. Lynne Gallagher from Energy Consumers Australia, and of course Peter Halliday, CEO of Siemens Australia. So this is the Brains Trust. Who wants to start? Who wants to give me their pitch for what the big takeout from today's summit was?
I'm going to jump in.
Okay.
I knew you would. I didn't want to put you on the spot, but I was very confident you would.
I mean, I'd like to hear other people's reflections, but, you know, we've been doing this a long time, Luke, right? I mean, we've been in these rooms before, and it felt like we were the only people who cared, like only the people in this room cared, right?
Yep.
This is the first time where the level of passion, the level of energy, but the sense in which we're on the march.
Yep. For
the first time in, I guess, the long time you and I have been doing this.
Yeah.
So if there's one thing I think that people should take out who weren't here or didn't get to it online was, you know, we're going to do this.
Yep.
I've got a clip that I posted many months ago of Obama in our equivalent of Bunnings saying, people tell me in his best Obama accent, which I can't do, people tell me that, you know, energy efficiency is not sexy. I think it's terribly sexy. So, you know, I think this is the sexy moment for energy efficiency.
Oh, that's super exciting. There was a bit of debate over the course of the afternoon about how sexy energy efficiency was. I think we achieved a consensus it was actually very sexy, but perhaps we need to tell the story better, right?
Yeah.
Heidi,
Can I
what about
offer
you?
with that? I think that you're absolutely right, Lynne. Like, there is this real sense of momentum behind it. This is something that we're talking about that's actually happening. It's not a hypothetical. But the other difference that I notice from being in this space for about 20 years is the way that we were more open to looking across to other sectors for inspiration, for opportunities to collaborate, and opportunities to actually get those co-benefits recognised. It's not just buildings being really efficient.
Yep.
It's not just our cars becoming electric and obviously very efficient and running on renewables, or our energy infrastructure working. It's actually a combination of all of those. And to hear that conversation front and centre and as more of an understood thing rather than a very fringe topic that I think it has been for far too long.
It's a really integrated story, right? And it goes to my point, like there's just an incredible depth of knowledge in the policy community, and we've had a tough few years. Energy efficiency hasn't been the top of the pops, but it means there's a bunch of people that have really thought deeply about this and as Lynne said, are ready to go. What about you, Peter? You're sort of thinking about this from a commercial perspective. You're obviously really interested in supporting the Siemens clients to actually do stuff out in the world. What was your reflection on the day?
I was surprisingly excited about the whole way it come together. For once, everyone's singing on the same page.
Yep.
Everyone's saying we've got to do this and we've got to do it now, and the time is right.
Yep.
And I just think everything's aligning, and you know, we know energy efficiency is important. We know there's a climate change issue happening. You see what's happening in Europe, and it just compounds the whole topic that now is the right time. And to have the Assistant Minister here make an announcement today that we're going to put some legislation together and work on some legislation, it means that it's going to happen.
It's the kind of the confluence of that great imperative around emissions reduction and the immediate crisis that we're facing over the next year or two around energy affordability. You've got a different perspective. You're coming from the US. Obviously, California has been, flying the flag for energy efficiency for, coming on for 50 years with the California Energy Commission. What was your take out sort of immersing yourself in this Australian policy milieu for half a day?
Yeah, well, it's sort of a little bit of a parallel universe, sort of different topics, but same general themes. I mean, I just felt the dots being connected left and right today. And politics, policy, and then actual practice. Yep. And then really linking to concrete benefits, like they go beyond just sort of the wonky energy efficiency stuff, but to public health. Yep. To really savings across the whole economy, really concrete benefits that emerge from practice. Because what's really seems to be what seems to be changing and really deepening is the understanding of the nuts and bolts of what the trade, what the practice, what the practitioner level. Sort of implementation of energy efficiency looks like, and for we're all on this like CEO level, and we talk policy, right? Yep. But this is jobs, this is trades, this is people in buildings doing putting in equipment and making sure it works and commissioning it, and so I just felt that this conversation was very grounded. And I guess I just finished by saying we're all kind of deer in the headlights with climate right now. Right. I mean, we are living climate change in Australia and California and many other places every single day. It's so obvious. And it's just becoming a given in the public sphere, that climate change is happening to us. And so we have to, there's an urgency. There's an urgency to both adapt and to mitigate. And we got to do it all at once.
Yeah. One thing I might get you to follow on, because I kind of want to get into some of the detail, because we've given some of the vibe of the day. One of the things that we've been talking about, Andrew, is kind of just the opportunity around thermal performance upgrades, and how that interacts with electrification and the journey that we're on in terms of decarbonising combustion in buildings. Do you want to just unpack some of your reflections on what you've seen in Australia and what you feel the opportunity might be on that front?
So I found it really fascinating, just the acknowledgement, and it seemed grounded in fact, that Australia is way ahead on the commercial side of the Class A. Yep. With neighbours as a world-leading thing, but then on the residential side, sort of pretty uneven, not the highest quality of residential construction that needs a lot of work on the envelope. And so you got to do the work on the envelope to best leverage the work on electrification. Yep. Those two things really are inextricable, inextricably linked. And so, so that you can put in efficient equipment and actually have it function efficiently and with longevity, you've got to have a well-sealed, preferably well-insulated building envelope. And so those two things really do go together. And I think, again, installation is not the most high-tech thing in the world, and it can create hundreds of thousands of jobs to implement that. And I think it's just good for Australia's economy, certainly for California's, to really pour public and private resources into doing that.
Maybe I'd just jump on your comment there, Andrew. Having lived in Europe for the last 6 years, and everything's insulated, double glazed windows, in the middle of winter, you're walking around in shorts and a t-shirt in your apartment. And we come back 6 months ago, and we rented a place in the southern suburbs of Sydney, and it was the coldest winter we have had.
Since last time you were in Australia.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Because the house was like a tent.
Yep.
It wasn't insulated. It was free-flowing air coming in from outside. It was unbelievably cold. Yep. So that whole building, that residential building stock, we've got a long way to go on that.
Yeah. How do we do it, Lynne?
Yeah, well, thanks, no pressure. No, but this is something we think deeply about, because as Energy Consumers Australia, I think for too long in the energy policy wonks, energy systems people think we only have to think about energy. Yeah. But you have to think about the interaction between people's built environment and to your point, climate change and electrification is now making a challenge even more evident. We sort of ignored it. And frankly, I think what we did, and some of this came up today, where people went, for too long, we've sort of gone, this is a personal choice, or the market will sort it, or, housing costs mean we build, or land costs means we build very cheap housing construction because land is very expensive. Now energy is expensive. So, and we finished the day with somebody actually throwing out a challenge around storytelling. And I think that's where it comes down to. All of us can have this conversation in the room, and I think it's really powerful that a broad range of people coming from all parts of the sort of, the ecosystem, if you like, now have a joined up conversation.
Yep.
Now we actually have to be able to have the conversation with people. And because we're not fighting amongst ourselves about, some of the technical stuff,
Yep.
we can actually go, well, how do we actually bring this to people?
Yeah, Heidi, BZE, you're pulling together all these incredible minds and applying it to these problems, but then you also think very carefully about how to communicate it and that narrative to bring communities along for a journey. Like, what is our task as a community of folk that are passionate about this topic in terms of more effectively communicating the end point in terms of unlocking that energy efficiency opportunity?
It is such an interesting space to work in because, and I think that we actually use some unhelpful terms of phrase here about like communicating to people that this is good for them, when the work that we do, because we are such a grassroots in many senses, like we engage people where they're coming from in solving problems. But, deciding together what the problem is that we're going to solve, because it's not the same problem in the suburbs of Sydney as it is in the middle of fossil fuel regions in central Queensland and New South Wales and in Western Australia and all around the country and indeed around the world. There are different problems that we're solving. So actually listening to communities and meeting them where they're at is unbelievably inspiring.
Yep.
Because if you look at the size of this problem and you look at this sheer volume of equipment and technology and skills that need to be applied to upgrading every single building in the country in a very short time frame, to be able to make those homes healthy, comfortable and affordable, businesses productive and vibrant and all of that, there is enormous upsides that we haven't really well understood until you go out in regions where things are imported, where they're made, where they are assembled, and you go and meet the workers. Go out on the factory floor, meet the workers who are making or assembling Australian heat pumps, and look at the companies that are making the electrical gizmos and gadgets that are needed to be able to upgrade the grid and do that coordination piece. You can be inspired and you can feel really confident in our ability, Australia's ingenuity, to be able to crack on with the job once we know what it is we're doing and where we're going. We do very little other than amplify and elevate the stories and the successes that are already on the ground. The communities on the ground have done the hard work. They are already making, assembling and applying their skills and knowledge, maybe not to the sectors that we think need to be part of the transition, but that shift is an untapped resource for Australia. When we did a study in the Hunter and Gladstone, we found that half of the jobs that we need to have to basically become the equivalent of an energy export superpower, renewable energy export superpower, half of those that skills profile are already in those regions. They are already working there and their jobs are vulnerable to fossil fuel highs and lows. Whereas what we could be doing could provide same workers, same skill sets with opportunities for long-term secure jobs, actually making the stuff that we need to get done right now across the country.
Thank you for pulling up on that, because we can be very high level and we can be sort of talking down at people, and it's the opportunity is to ground the conversation in communities and work collaboratively to build that capability so that they're advocating for this future and feel a sense of ownership and investment in it. So there's that geographic lens, and there's also the sectoral lens, right? Like we talk about energy efficiency, it's actually means very different things, and there's very different problems and opportunities in each part of the economy, and we need to be alive for that. It's useful if you're a minister to think rolling that up and that's a big opportunity and we should invest, but the only way you get it done is actually if you get down onto the ground floor.
It's both and.
Both. All of those things overlaid each other.
Right.
So industrial is industrial. It's about industrial processes, and every process, every type of industry has a different process, and you have to kind of unpack that. And residential looks more like construction jobs, right? So very, very different. I guess I wanted to just inject that once upon a time I had a career doing remote power systems in developing countries. And so, these were standalone lead-acid batteries, early stage inverters back in the 1990s. And the leader globally in those sorts of systems was Australia.
Yep.
And I was keenly aware of Australia's sort of entrepreneurship in that space at that time. And it's made me sort of reflect today during the course of all the conversations that entrepreneurship is a pretty unique quality that Australia brings to the table. And so there's an independence, and a sort of a creative thinking. And I'd be interested to hear what everybody else has to say about that. But that's my impression, and I kind of feel that emerging as sort of all the light bulbs go on, and we're like, we got to do this.
And that spirit's continued. Like there's incredible work happening, particularly off-grid in places like WA. Integrating supply and demand in that constraint is
water efficiency as well, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it focuses the mind. And one of the things I'm really appreciating about this new moment, which I think you spoke to, Lynne, when it feels different, is that we're starting to see an appreciation that this is energy efficiency is not just over here on the side; it's fundamentally integrated into this energy transition we're working way through. Because you mentioned renewables, like we're barreling towards a high penetration renewable energy system. Talk a lot about 43% emissions reduction by 2030, 83%. Renewable energy in the energy system is Australia's target by 2030, and we need to bring the demand side to the table to align the load in households and businesses right across the country with the availability of that renewable generation. Lynne, one thing that we didn't get to talk a lot about was small businesses.
Yeah.
And this is like we talk, in Australia at the moment, there's a conversation and talk around households. There's a conversation around really big businesses with the safeguard mechanism. And, there's lots of tweets flying around about, what we should be doing on that front, and appropriately so. It's an important debate. But what about the small businesses, the many small businesses peppered around the country that it doesn't feel like that we've got a plan for yet?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm going to speak to some of the research, I guess, but also, make the link between sort of small business and households as well. So, because it's a very common experience, particularly with small business. I mean, at the sort of they're time constrained, they're very busy. We even heard that today in the conversation about industrial and commercial people going, it actually takes time to be energy efficient. Yeah. And that's the thing that comes out when we talk to small business. And one of the people on our reference committee has just completed over 2 years, 17,000 energy advice consultations with small business. Right. And the key takeout that has come from that is you can create plans for people, you can tell them what's going to work for them, and it is firstly about energy efficiency. Before they actually go and put solar on the roof, particularly if you've got businesses that are already, most of their energy uses during the day, do they really need solar, et cetera, et cetera. The key takeout was they don't even have the time or the headspace to implement it. Yeah. Yeah. So the thing I think for small business, and I'm going to say the same thing about households, is we have to have a conversation, to use the words that Heidi just used, about meeting people where they are. It's exactly the same with small business. This is inevitable. You need to do this. We've got your back. Here's a personalised plan. Here's the easy things you can do first. Here's the harder things you might aspire to later. Here's where the payoffs are going to come. So actually have a sort of personalised roadmap.
It's like a roadmap, that's
exactly.
Right. And they use that terminology in Europe around buildings, but you can imagine that same sort of framework being incredibly powerful for business. So you can just see it out in front of you and you can make those decisions to invest when you're ready to.
Exactly. But the other thing they say, the last thing they say, and I think this is also true with residential, with households and families, it's almost as well have the person that gets you started. Yep. So who's the trusted person in your home? So I was in the Hunter a couple of weeks ago talking to the Master Electricians Association. Who is the one person who's going to be in people's homes, who's going to be able to give them advice, who's going to go, heat pump, electric hot water system, trickle charge, 3-phase, whatever. Who's going to make sense of it for you? So who's actually going to be your partner or your concierge or your person that can be trusted? And at this stage, what they're saying as well is they may be in the home, they may be people that people look to for advice, but they're not equipped with the information. They don't feel that they have the knowledge as well to say to people, well, you know, do the draft proofing first, right? I mean, you've rung me because you want to put, I don't know, something amazing, whatever, but, you know, putting a solar system on a tent is not actually very smart, right? Or, you know, do the insulation. Ceiling insulation will reduce 40% of your energy use. So before you actually get me in to do some of this other big smart stuff, do some of the basic stuff as well, because then the payoffs of doing that later more expensive smart stuff will be there. So again, I think we've got to now take this sort of, I mean, it's great the way that we're talking from the minister down of having a plan, scaling it up, coordination across Commonwealth and state.
Yep.
But now we've actually got to coordinate it and integrate it into how people are actually going to get the information and then how they're going to take action.
All right, well, we should bring this home because there's drinks being drunk out there and there might not be any left if we don't stop talking soon. But I'm going to ask the Australians on the panel sort of what their sort of number one priority will be for this new strategy. But while I give you all time to think, Andrew, California's been on this journey for a long time. What is the kind of the fundamental KPI that we should be thinking about in terms of the way we structure our thinking around energy efficiency? I'm just going to leave that open to you. What's the most important thing that we should be learning from your great state?
Well, so first of all, you know, it would be hubris to sort of represent California as having all the answers. So I definitely don't want to go there. I think collaboration is our greatest strength, and we have a lot of experience, you know, on standards and sort of norm making. We've brought up our basic level of construction. You can't build an inefficient, you know, building in California, and that's all true. But I think the KPI, sort of the group of KPIs that I would point to is will really have to do with equity. I think our biggest challenge is making sure that 5 years, 8 years, you know, by 2030, say,
Yep.
that we follow through with the requirement, really, that we start really and bring along the folks who really don't have the capital to do this, who live in the tents, who need the work, and will benefit from that, and society at large will benefit from that. But that's got to be the commitment to get that done, and that's true in California and here in Australia. So I feel like that's the challenge that's just right in front of us, is kind of put our money where our mouth is and get that done. That's a trust building activity that shows the world that we're serious about doing this, finding ways to get to our low income housing, our underinvested communities, our frontline communities. In California, we have a lot of native tribes.
Yep.
You know, we really have to follow through on that promise.
So in light of that, Lynne, what's the big idea?
My first, I guess the priority that I'm really thinking about follows on from what I was talking about earlier. I think we need to create a trusted institution, and I'm nominally calling it the Energy Trust. But it's somewhere where you can go and get advice, whether it's the tradies or whether it's the homeowner, whether you're people living in rental properties. You know, the people we didn't talk about today are landlords, right? And most of our landlords, we've got 2 million people who negatively gear properties, and they're teachers, they're nurses, they're sales managers. So my idea would be that we have an energy trust where you can go and get information, you can start to personalise your own roadmaps, you can find your way through this thicket of, do I do this, do I do that? How do I chunk it down so I can actually change both my home and the home that I own and rent to someone else? Or if I'm a small business, how can I get further along the way to reducing my energy costs?
What's your pitch, Peter?
I think it's the piece. I think we're all together. We're all singing the same song. As I said before, we need to have in place financial vehicles for large industries, SMEs, even residentials, to tap in to fund this upgrading process that we need to go through. You know, we've just come out of COVID, where a lot of people are struggling to meet their bills every month.
Yep.
And to throw on an energy efficiency program, they've got no money to do it. So we've got to have these financial vehicles available to execute on our plan.
Yeah, it's a massive capital investment to get this done, right? So we've got to work out where the money comes from.
I think we did the numbers a little while ago, or Vinny's. I have to credit one of my board members. He basically said if it's $50,000 a house, it's $250 million that we're actually asking. And that could be other things, not just energy efficiency, but if it's solar or a battery or something else. But if it's $50,000 a house, that's $250 million, which lines up pretty nicely with what we're actually thinking about as big investment. But both investment has to be funded somehow. So how are we going to make that
The
happen?
big REITs probably can afford it, but everyone else below
Yeah.
that big REIT line for commercial buildings, they can't afford it.
Yeah.
They're not going to do it.
Yep. Yep.
Unless you legislate it, and then there's,
Yeah, there's various pathways, but I agree. Even if you legislate it, even if they've got
Still
those
gotta
minimum
finance it.
requirements,
Means, yeah.
got to bring that to the table. Heidi,
All about the supply chains.
there you go.
Beyond zero emissions, all about the manufacturing and the supply chain. So when we start to say, let's upgrade buildings, like that's not without enormous amounts of materials,
Yeah.
equipment, and the skills and training. And so when it comes to our input to something like an energy efficiency target and strategy, the opportunity, that cost of the stuff, that needs to be counted in as an upside to this. So we actually need to start planning right now to see how much we can dial up Australia's capacity to meet the needs, parts of these, supply chain needs to execute the task ahead.
Yep.
And that's exciting. That's a big challenge, but it's a huge opportunity as well. And it's an opportunity for people and places and job types that currently are at risk of pretty big upheaval in the transition as it's coming at us. So I think let's get all about the supply chains and the supply side of this.
And just to put an exclamation mark on that, thinking about the role that demand for fixing our buildings can play in decarbonising industry. We talk a lot about embodied carbon when we're in the buildings world, but your scope 3 is my scope 1. Like we have an opportunity if we do this right to create demand for low or zero carbon building materials, and just to incentivise, create value for those organisations that are investing in those low carbon technologies. It's all part of the same story.
So as we sign out, I think it's really important to think of an ecosystem approach to the problem and the solution here. So when we talk to an individual homeowner or an individual business, large or small, asking them to upskill, educate, and then resource the transition on their own is a really big task and often insurmountable. Those who can already have, those who can't, they're left off to the side, right? They're not at the table yet. So actually taking a precinct-based approach to this, we think at Beyond Zero Emissions, we think a precinct-based approach to decarbonising the manufacturing sector, getting those large energy users, those as anchor tenants in a zero emissions precinct of manufacturing, helps to address the supply, the demand side of those renewable energy zones, those supplies, the big demand. We need to match that up, and we need to be taking that same approach at a neighbourhood level as well. So it is not up to each individual to get on with the job themselves. It is actually up to us to work to solve the problem at the right scale, that solutions are affordable and efficient and really effective.
All right, well then we're wrapping up, but I'm going to throw one more shrimp on the barbie around the ecosystem piece, which is, and I know we all agree it's the skills. So supporting the development of the skilled trades, the engineers, all the various people that need to be brought to bear on this massive transition. I say that because my colleague Holly Taylor, when she watches this later, would come and punch me in the arm if I didn't mention the skills, because it's so critical. And there's a huge task, and so often we make policy in this space and the skills as an afterthought.
Yeah.
Whereas actually, we need to be thinking about what policies we want to roll out sitting here in 2022, in 2026 or 2027, and start the process of building the skills for those policies now, and communicating to the folk that are going to be taking those jobs that it's worth investing and upskilling, because there's certainty around what that pipeline of work is going to look like. So that's the final piece. I am not going to keep you away from the drinks table any longer. Peter, Lynne, Andrew and Heidi, just delighted. I feel a lot more integrated. I feel like I have a sense of what my takeouts from today are. I'll be able to watch this back later and refresh my memory. Thanks so much for putting aside some time and giving me the benefit and our viewers the benefit of your expertise. I'm looking forward to working with all of you and everybody else that was in this room today to take this vision and act on it, make it a reality. Cheers.
Well, thanks to you and the EEC for a beautiful day.
It was a fantastic event. Thank you.
Thank you.